She betrayed me and completely miscalculated. I used to believe silence meant peace, the kind that settles into a house after years of shared routines, the quiet hum of success earned not inherited. I built my life brick by brick, long nights, early mornings, deals that scared other people away. Money came later, respect came slower, and my family was supposed to be the reward. That morning started like any other. My son arguing with his cereal, my wife scrolling her phone, pretending to listen, sunlight pouring through windows I paid for with 20 years of discipline. I remember thinking how calm everything looked, how misleading calm can be. I left for work early, not because I had to, but because I liked arriving before everyone else. It reminded me where I came from. No shortcuts, no favors, just work. I checked numbers, approved a merger, and ignored a strange tightness in my chest, the kind that does not hurt but warns. When I came home that evening, my wife was late. She texted something vague about meetings running long. She worked hard too, or at least that is what I believed. I fed my son, helped with homework, and told myself adulthood was learning to wait without suspicion. 2 days passed like that. Small delays, unanswered questions, nothing concrete enough to accuse, just enough to feel off balance. The house still ran smoothly, dinners, bedtime stories, polite smiles. But the air felt thinner, like a storm holding its breath. On the third afternoon, I was reviewing contracts when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Wealth teaches you that most interruptions want something. But something made me answer. Her voice was shaking. She did not introduce herself at first, just asked if I was sitting down. That question alone changed the temperature of the room. When she finally said her name, my stomach dropped. My wife's sister. She said she was sorry before she said anything else. Said she had gone back and forth for 2 days. Said she could not carry it anymore. I told her to slow down. I joked lightly because humor has always been my shield. But she did not laugh. She told me she had overheard a phone call, not meant for her ears. Whispered words late at night, laughter that did not belong to family. A name she recognized from my wife's workplace. A colleague I had heard mentioned casually at dinners. I felt oddly calm as she spoke, like my mind stepped back to observe instead of react. Years of negotiations teach you that emotion clouds judgment. I thanked her for telling me and told her I needed time. She cried I did not. After the call, I sat alone in my office long after sunset, the city lights below me blinking like nothing in the world had changed. I did not confront anyone that night. I went home, kissed my son on the forehead, and listened to my wife talk about her day. I watched her carefully, not with anger, but with curiosity, like studying a familiar painting and realizing the colors were wrong. And that was when I understood something important. This story was not going to be about losing everything. It was going to be about seeing clearly for the first time. That night, I barely slept. Not because of anger, but because my brain refused to stop calculating patterns, timelines, probabilities. I replayed conversations from the last few months with a clarity that felt cruel. Late meetings, sudden phone calls, stepping outside to talk, lowered voices, smiles that arrived too late. In the morning, my wife acted normal. Too normal. She packed our son's lunch, reminded me about a school meeting, laughed at something on television. I watched her the way you watch a magician. Once you know there is a trick, every gesture suddenly deliberate. I did not confront her. Confrontation is loud and wasteful when you do not yet have the full picture. Instead, I went to work and did what I always did when things felt unstable. I gathered information. I checked calendars quietly. Business habits make this easy. Her work schedule, her travel claims. Overlapping dates that now stood out like bold print. A conference she mentioned once, but never again. A dinner that ran late on a night her office had been empty according to public records. By midday, I had confirmed one thing. The colleague her sister mentioned was real. Same company, same department, same projects. A man with a polished online presence and motivational quotes about integrity. Irony has a sense of humor. Still, I felt strangely grounded. Wealth gives you options, but discipline gives you control. I reminded myself that panic was for people with no leverage, and I had built leverage my entire life. That evening, her sister texted again, asking if I was okay. I replied honestly but briefly, told her I appreciated her courage and that she had done the right thing. Secrets rot the people who keep them more than the people they protect. When I got home, my wife mentioned that colleague casually, complained about his ideas, laughed about office politics. She did not know she was handing me confirmation wrapped in small talk. I nodded, smiled, and noted how easy it was for her to lie. After Our son went to bed. She sat beside me on the couch, scrolling her phone. The screen tilted away from me just slightly, a habit I had never noticed before. I asked how work was. She said fine without looking up. That was the moment something settled inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, but clarity. I understood that whatever version of my marriage I thought I had was already over. Not because of what she did, but because of what she was willing to hide. I went to my office later and opened a folder I had not touched in years. Personal contingency planning. People assume wealth makes you reckless. In truth, it makes you cautious. I reviewed assets, trusts, timelines, not to punish but to protect. This was not about revenge. It was about stability for my child and dignity for myself. I refused to be a man who reacts instead of responds. Before bed, I looked at my wife sleeping peacefully, unaware that the ground beneath her certainty was already shifting. I felt no satisfaction, only resolve. The truth had entered my life quietly through a shaking voice and a phone call I almost ignored. And I knew now that the hardest part was not discovering the betrayal. It was deciding how to end a chapter without becoming someone I did not respect. The next morning, I took my son to school instead of my wife. A small change, but it gave me space to think. He talked about a class project, completely unaware that his world was balancing on adult decisions. I promised myself whatever happened he would never feel the ground shake. At work, I met with my attorney under the excuse of a routine review. He had known me for years and did not waste time with sympathy. Facts only, options only. I respected that. We spoke about timing, discretion, and protection, especially for my child, especially from chaos. I did not say the word divorce out loud yet. Saying things gives them weight. Instead, I said I needed clarity and control. He nodded like a man who had seen this story before. That afternoon, my wife called unusually cheerful, said she might be late again, joked about ordering takeout. I agreed easily. Too easily. She did not notice the difference. People rarely do when they think they are safe. Her sister called me again that evening, apologizing repeatedly. I stopped her gently and told her she had nothing to apologize for. She told me more then, things she had not planned to say. Fragments of conversations, tone, laughter, familiarity. Not one mistake, but a pattern. I thanked her again and asked her not to involve herself further. Not because I blamed her, but because I needed clean lines. She agreed, though I could hear the relief mixed with fear. That night, my wife came home late, kissed my cheek, and went to shower. Her phone buzzed on the counter, once, twice, then silent. I did not touch it. Trust, when broken, does not need proof to stay broken. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote notes. Not accusations, but observations. Dates, times, changes in behavior. I treated my own marriage like a case study, detached, precise. The irony was not lost on me. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. Present, calm, reliable. I attended the school meeting, held my wife's hand, smiled for photos. Inside, I felt like a man standing on a train platform watching something depart without him. She, on the other hand, grew careless. Confidence does that. She talked more freely, complained about work, vented about that colleague without realizing each word tightened the narrative she did not know I was building. One evening, she mentioned a business trip coming up. Last minute, she said. I nodded and asked where. She hesitated, then named a city I knew well, one I owned property in. The coincidence almost made me laugh. That night, after everyone slept, I stood in the dark living room surrounded by things I had earned, art, furniture, memories. I realized none of it mattered as much as the choice in front of me. Expose immediately and shatter everything. Or wait, gather, confirm, and exit with control. I chose the second. Not out of fear, but out of respect for myself and my son. Storms do not scare me, disorder does. And as my wife slept peacefully upstairs, believing her secret was safe, I finalized a quiet decision. The truth would come out on my terms, not hers. The business trip arrived exactly as she said it would. A suitcase by the door, confident movements, rehearsed excuses. She kissed our son longer than usual, then kissed me quickly, like checking an item off a list. I wished her a good trip and meant it. Peace is easier when you stop expecting honesty. Once she left, the house felt different, lighter, quieter. I worked from home that day and noticed how much space one person can occupy even when they are not there. I made lunch for my son, packed snacks, and answered emails like any other day. That afternoon, I received a message from a private investigator my attorney had recommended. Efficient, discreet, no drama. He confirmed what I already knew. Hotel booking under my wife's name, second guest arriving separately, same dates. The colleague from work, Seeing it written did not hurt. It clarified. Betrayal loses power when it becomes information instead of imagination. I closed the file and went to pick up my son. He asked if Mom would call tonight, and I said yes, because she would. People who live double lives are very good at keeping schedules. That evening she called exactly on time. Asked about homework, joked about room service, complained about meetings. I responded calmly and listened carefully. Every word felt like watching someone act in a play I had already read. After the call, I sat alone and thought about the man I used to be when I had nothing. Hungry, ambitious, stubborn. That man would not beg or rage. He would plan and move forward. Success does not change who you are, it reveals it. The next day, I met with my attorney again. This time we spoke plainly. Evidence, custody, timing. He reminded me that my wealth would make me a target for emotional manipulation later. Guilt, apologies, promises. I smiled because I already anticipated that. I told him I wanted a clean separation, minimal conflict, and full focus on my child. He said that was possible if I stayed calm and consistent. Calm has always been my strongest asset. When my wife returned 2 days later, she looked relaxed, energized. The glow people get when they think they have gotten away with something. She hugged me, talked about the trip, and brought a small gift for our son. That night, as we sat at dinner, she mentioned the colleague again, this time with mild irritation. Said he was difficult to work with, unreliable even. I nodded and thought about how lies evolve when people sense danger without understanding it. I did not confront her that night or the next. Instead, I started making changes quietly, separating routines, shifting responsibilities, being more present with my son than ever. She noticed, but misread it as affection returning. One evening, she asked if everything was okay between us. I looked at her and smiled softly, said, "Of course. Why? Would anything be wrong?" The relief on her face confirmed something important. She believed the danger had passed. By the 5th week, everything had settled into a strange rhythm. Calm on the surface, tension underneath. My wife grew more confident while I grew quieter, not distant, just precise. Every word measured, every decision intentional. I began documenting, not to attack, but to prepare. School schedules, medical records, routines. I wanted continuity for my son, not disruption. Children do not need to inherit adult mistakes. My wife started talking about the future again. Vacations, renovations, maybe a bigger house. I listened politely and said very little. Planning a future with someone who already left it is an odd experience, like discussing weather on a sinking ship. One evening, her sister reached out again, hesitant this time. Said my wife had noticed something was off and asked if she had said anything to me. I told her calmly that she should not lie, but also should not insert herself further. Honesty without involvement is still honesty. That same night, my wife asked me directly if I trusted her. The question was almost impressive in its timing. I paused just long enough to make it real and said, "Trust is built daily, not demanded." She nodded and did not push further. A few days later, she mentioned another late meeting. Different excuse, same pattern. I smiled and offered to put our son to bed. She thanked me with relief. Convenience is the most dangerous comfort in a marriage. I used those evenings to talk with my son, read longer stories, asked more questions. I wanted him anchored to me, not by fear but by presence. Behind the scenes, my attorney finalized steps, filings prepared but not submitted, everything waiting for my signal. Control is knowing you can act without needing to act yet. Then came the moment I did not plan for. My wife slipped, not dramatically but subtly. She referenced a conversation I had never had with her, something she could only know if someone else had told her. The colleague. I did not react. I simply noted it and changed the subject. But inside, something closed. Not angrily, just finally. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Clarity does that. It removes the weight of indecision. The next morning, I made a decision over coffee. While watching the sun rise through windows I once thought symbolized success. I would end this not with an explosion, but with truth placed carefully and firmly on the table. I scheduled a meeting for the following week. Neutral location, no audience, no drama. Just 2 adults and the reality she believed she had hidden. For the first time since that phone call from her sister, I felt calm without effort. Not because it hurt less, but because I knew exactly what I was going to do. And once you know that, fear has nothing left to offer. The day of the meeting arrived without drama. That alone felt symbolic. No raised voices, no rushed exits. Just a calendar reminder and a quiet drive to a small office near the park where my son liked to play. I chose the location deliberately, neutral. Calm impossible to turn into a scene. My wife arrived 5 minutes late. Nervous smile forced confidence. She asked why we were not at home. I said some conversations deserve space. She laughed lightly, but her hands gave her away. I did not accuse her. Not at first. I talked about us, about years of building something stable, about trust being the foundation that makes everything else irrelevant. She nodded along until I stopped talking. Silence does more work than words when used correctly. Finally, she asked what this was really about. I slid a single folder across the table. Not thick, not dramatic. Just enough. She did not open it immediately. People sense truth before they see it. When she did, her face changed slowly. Not shock, but recognition. The look of someone realizing the story they told themselves had reached its ending. She tried to speak, stopped, then tried again. She said it was complicated, that it did not mean anything, that it was stress, that it was temporary. I listened without interruption. Calm is disarming when someone expects anger. When she finished, I said one sentence, quietly. Clearly, you made choices, and now so will I. She asked if I was angry. I said no. I am finished. Anger would mean I was still negotiating emotionally. I was not. She cried then. Not theatrically, just tired tears. Said she never meant to hurt anyone, especially our son. I told her intentions do not undo actions, but responsibility can still shape the outcome. I explained what would happen next. Separation, custody, stability. No public humiliation, no chaos. For our child's sake, and because dignity matters to me. She looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. She asked if there was any chance. I shook my head gently. Trust once broken does not return by apology, it returns by time and consistency. And I was no longer interested in waiting. We left separately. No shouting, no promises. Just reality accepted unevenly. That evening I took my son to the park, pushed him on the swings, and listened to his laughter echo into the evening. Life continuing exactly as it should. When I put him to bed, he asked if everything was okay. I said yes, and meant something different than I had weeks ago. Everything was finally honest. The weeks after that conversation were quiet in a different way. Not tense, not fragile, just real. My wife moved out without argument, took what she needed and left the rest untouched. We spoke only about our son's schedules, routine school pickups. Efficiency replaced emotion. People think separation is loud. Lawyers fights accusations. But when one side stops pretending, the noise fades quickly. Clarity has a way of simplifying everything. I focused on structure. Mornings, breakfast, school drop-offs. Evenings, homework, dinners, stories. My son adjusted faster than I expected, because children sense stability more than explanations. I did not speak badly about his mother. I spoke honestly but gently. Love does not disappear, it just changes form. My wife tried once more to talk about us. Not dramatically, just a quiet request for coffee. I declined. Respectfully, not out of punishment, but because reopening closed doors confuses everyone, especially children. Her sister reached out again. Thanked me for handling everything calmly. Said my wife was struggling with guilt. I acknowledged that guilt is part of accountability and left it there. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Work continued as usual. Success has no pause button. If anything, I felt sharper, more focused. Distraction is expensive, and I had finally eliminated it. 1 evening, as I sat alone after my son fell asleep, I reflected on the irony of it all. The wealth, the house, the career, none of it protected me from betrayal. But it did give me the freedom to respond with dignity instead of desperation. I realized something important then. Winning is not about taking more than someone else loses. Winning is walking away intact with your values unchanged. I did not feel lonely. I felt complete. Not because I had everything, but because I had clarity. The chapter had ended without explosions, without bitterness. Just truth placed firmly where denial used to live. And for the first time since that phone call weeks ago, I smiled without effort. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I refused to lose myself. Time did what it always does when you stop fighting it. It moved forward. Routines solidified, laughter returned to the house in a different shape, but just as real. My son stopped asking why and started asking what we were doing next. That is how healing has begun. Co-parenting became practical and predictable. Calendars shared, boundaries respected. My wife kept her distance, not out of anger, but understanding. The colleague from her work disappeared from conversation entirely. Some stories end not with closure, but with irrelevance. I started reclaiming parts of myself I had put on hold. Early morning runs, quiet dinners, music playing without negotiation. It felt less like starting over and more like returning to a version of myself that had always been there waiting. Friends noticed the change, said I looked lighter, younger. I joked that clarity is cheaper than therapy. Humor comes back when resentment leaves. One evening as I tucked my son in, he said something simple that stayed with me. He said, "Dad, you smile more now." Children notice truths adults try to hide. That single sentence confirmed every decision I had made. I no longer measured success by how full my house was or how complete my family looked from the outside. I measured it by peace, by consistency, by waking up without dread. The betrayal that once felt like an ending had become a pivot point, not because it made me stronger, but because it reminded me who I already was. I had not lost my family. I had protected my child and preserved my dignity. And those are victories no one can take from you. A year later, the house felt fully alive again. Not because everything looked the same, but because it finally fit. Fewer voices, more honesty. Fewer assumptions, more intention. My son had grown steadier, more confident. And so had I. I ran into my ex-wife once at a school event. We exchanged polite words, nothing heavy, nothing unresolved. She looked different, quieter, reflective. Not broken, just changed. I wished her well, and meant it. Forgiveness does not require reunion, it requires release. Driving home that day, I thought about how close I came to reacting instead of responding, to letting anger write a story that would have damaged everyone involved. Strength is not volume, it is restraint. People still assume wealth makes pain easier. It does not, but it does. Give you the responsibility to handle pain without spreading it. I chose that path deliberately, and I would choose it again. In the evenings when my son is asleep and the house is quiet, I sit with a cup of coffee and reflect, not on betrayal, but on growth, on how life tests you not to break you, but to reveal what you stand on. I did not win because someone else lost. I won because I stayed myself. Because I showed my child that dignity matters more than ego, and that calm is not weakness, it is power. The chapter that began with a phone call I almost ignored ended with a life that felt honest again. And that is how I know this story ends well. Not loudly, not dramatically, but correctly.